The Gilded Age mansion too big to save Anna Dean Farm. Imagine this. On a hill stands a house that feels more like a small city. Glitter, towers, marble, fountains. Its name is Anna Dean Farm, an estate so vast it's almost impossible to rescue. Beautiful? Yes. But behind the beauty are bills piling up like a snowstorm. Empty halls, cold pipes, silence where life once hummed. The owner dreamed of immortality and got a trap instead. Every floor is an expense, every hall a debt. And then comes the problem no one wanted to face. The land is worth more than the dream. The city presses in from all sides, and the grand palace begins to disappear, not by fire or war, but by slow, quiet dismantling. Who hit the brakes? And when did it become too late? Why did this giant turn out to be too big to live? And is there still a way to give it a heart again? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible, and today we're climbing a hill in Ohio where something impossible still stands, or at least part of it does. The gates are still there, massive, iron, ornate enough to hint at what once lived behind them. They frame absence now. No drive, no mansion, no footmen with lanterns in the rain, only grass, open air, and the echo of 1,000 rooms. The gates to Anna Dean Farm stand open because there is nothing left to guard. But if you step through and let your eyes settle on the emptied slope, the ground begins to speak. Foundation scars, a soft arc where a reflecting pool once held the sky, stone steps that climb to nowhere. And if you truly look, knowing what to seek, you can trace the footprint of one of the Midwest's largest private estates, a house so large it ran on its own power plant, its own waterworks, its own farm, stables, greenhouses, and a village for staff, a domain of roughly 30 buildings across roughly 1,000 acres. A main house with more than 60 rooms, monthly utility charges that could swallow a working family's yearly pay. Anna Dean Farm was never just a mansion. It was a built ecosystem, a self-contained world on a hill outside Barberton, Ohio, in the early years of the 20th century. Marble, mahogany, hand-cut stone, steam heat, electric light, and indoor plumbing when much of America still used privies. By any rational measure, it was extraordinary. It was also, in practice, unsustainable. The numbers sketch the truth. Accounts differ, yet maintaining Anna Dean Farm reportedly consumed tens of thousands of dollars each month, at a time when the average worker earned less than $500 a year. The boilers burned through coal by the ton. The grounds needed a near regiment of gardeners. The fabric of the house demanded constant tending: paint, plaster, roofing, panes. Each winter meant frozen pipes. Each storm meant repairs. Each season meant more invoices. Unlike Europe's great houses, propped up by centuries of title and inherited capital, Anna Dean Farm had no dynastic cushion, no ancient ledger of rents and estates. It had one man, one fortune, one vision. When that vision wavered, when revenue slowed, when expenses did not, when the world beyond the ironwork shifted, the house had no backstop. The chill beauty tempts nostalgia, orchestras and champagne, silk gowns drifting through marble corridors, black tie debates about industry and art beneath crystal. Some of that was real, briefly. Beneath the glitter and the architecture, a blunter fact ground forward. The house was too vast, too costly, too ambitious for the economy beyond those gates. The question at Anna Dean Farm was not poetic, but operational. How do you retain a place that costs more to run than most people earn in a lifetime? How do you keep a 60-room house heated and staffed when the surrounding city strains to get by? How do you conserve beauty once beauty itself becomes the burden? The answer, then, was that you do not. At least, not there and not then. Not in the 1920s, not in Ohio during the Great Depression, not in a world accelerating faster than any mansion could adapt. Anadine Farm did not vanish by fire or flood. It faded under something quieter and more relentless: arithmetic. The math stopped balancing. So go back to the start, to the hour when none of this felt impossible, when the dream was still climbing out of the ground, when one man stood on an empty hillside and decided to build something meant to last forever. Forever is easier to imagine when you are holding a match, not a metaphorical match, an actual match, the kind you strike against a box, the kind that flares bright, burns steady, and makes fire answer to human hands. In the 1890s, matches were everywhere. They lit stoves, lamps, cigars, and furnaces. They were small, inexpensive, indispensable, and if you could make them better than anyone else, if you could produce them by the millions, you could turn phosphorus and wood into something far more valuable: money. Ohio Columbus Barber understood this with precision. Born in 1841, Barber was a businessman wired for efficiency and scale. He did not invent the match, he industrialized it. By the 1880s, his diamond match company had become the world's largest maker of matches, turning out billions annually. The concept sounded simple: cut wood, treat it with chemicals, box it, ship it. But the reality demanded plants, machines, trained workers, and a distribution web that reached everywhere. Barber built the system end to end. The profits followed quickly. The question was what to do with those profits. Many men would have stopped at wealth. Barber aimed for permanence. He wanted to build a town, not merely invest in one, but plan it, design it, and will it into life the way he had willed his factories into motion. In 1891, he founded Barberton, Ohio, about 35 miles south of Cleveland. The plan was elegant: bring industry to the land, bring workers to the industry, and spread prosperity through both. Matches would anchor the economy, and other factories would join them. Barber would supply jobs, housing, and infrastructure. The town would grow. Workers' families would find stability, and Barber would leave a legacy more enduring than any wooden splint that ever took a spark. The plan worked. Barberton expanded rapidly. New plants opened. Rail lines tied the town to Cleveland and Akron. Lake Anna, a man-made reservoir, supplied water and a public green. Streets filled with workers and children. Shops appeared. Schools rose. Within a decade, empty farmland had become an industrial community that functioned smoothly. Newspapers hailed the Match King, and he had delivered. But payrolls and smokestacks were not enough. Towns need more than wages. They need aspiration and grace. They need a symbol that says, "This place matters. This place will last." Barber chose to raise that symbol on a hill. The site looked west over Barberton, high ground with a full view of the valley, far enough from the mills to escape the soot, close enough to witness the results of his enterprise. The estate would be vast and deliberate, blending the poise of European country houses with the output of a working farm. There would be gardens, livestock, and greenhouses. It would be modern: electric light, steam heat, telephone lines. And it would carry a name that meant something personal, a tender note inside all the iron and ambition. He would call it Anadine Farm, after his wife. Anadine Barber, by most accounts, was practical and public-spirited, active in civic projects, charity, and the daily work of shaping a town. She was not chasing titles or borrowed glamour. She was a partner to Barber's vision, clear-eyed about the obligations that accompany wealth. The farm would honor her, yes, and also prove a point. Success need not abandon the land. Modern technology and agricultural skill could live side by side. Industry and beauty did not have to be opposites. The early drawings put that philosophy into walls and pipes, a main house with reception rooms for guests and offices for managing operations, a dedicated power plant to generate electricity not only for the mansion, but for the farm buildings, the greenhouses, the stables, the workshops, a mill to grind grain, heated barns to protect livestock, ice houses for preservation through summer. Everything connected, everything efficient, each piece serving a larger, integrated system. The budget matched the ambition. Exact figures from planning are hard to pin down, but contemporaries estimated total costs in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, equivalent to many millions today. Barber could fund it. The match trade still boomed. The town thrived. The timing felt perfect. Construction began in the late 1890s. Stone was quarried. Foundations were poured. Architects refined elevations. Crews arrived with tools and timetables. And on that Ohio hillside, something that sounded impossible began to take physical shape. What no one pressed too hard, what perhaps could not be asked in the momentum of optimism, was whether building a dream this large meant creating something that might never be sustained. That answer would come later. For now, the work went on. The work continued, and it evolved. What began as plans for a substantial country house, impressive, yes, yet still within reason, expanded step by step into something else entirely. With each decision, each redrawn blueprint, each meeting with architects and engineers, Barber's vision grew. The main house swelled from a comfortable estate into a sprawling palace. Farm buildings multiplied. Infrastructure tangled into a sophisticated web. By the early 1900s, Anadine Farm had shifted from residence to small kingdom. The name carried its own argument. This was not Barber Estate or Hilltop Manor in the Gilded Age style. It was personal, Anadine Farm. A farm named for a woman suggested pasture and family rather than display for its own sake. That nuance was deliberate. Barber intended function as much as show, a place that produced, a demonstration that modern wealth could elevate agriculture, that technology and tradition could work in harness, useful and beautiful at once. The early designs made that hybrid visible. Yes, the main house would be grand, 3 stories of stone and brick with rooms for entertaining, for music, for guests, and for art. But it would also include offices and workrooms dedicated to managing a real farm. The drawings put a ballroom beside a business office, a conservatory for tropical plants beside a telegraph room tied to Barber's industrial network. Beyond the house, the plans multiplied. A power plant would anchor the estate's circulatory system, generating electricity not only for light, but for water pumps, heating, and machinery. Steam boilers would send heat through an underground lattice of pipes to every building. A water tower would hold steady pressure. Drains and tile would keep low ground dry. Telephone lines would bind the big house to stables, greenhouses, and workshops. The greenhouses themselves would be serious tools. Glass spans heated all year, forcing flowers and vegetables through Ohio winters. The stables would hold dozens of horses, not only for transport but for breeding and showing, proof of standards in stock and care. Barns would house cattle, pigs, and poultry. Silos would bank grain. Workshops would handle repairs. Staff housing would keep skilled hands close to the work that never stopped. The money matched the scale. Early estimates placed total cost between $300,000 and $500,000. Astonishing sums for the time. For context, a comfortable middle-class house in Barberton might cost roughly $2,000. A factory worker might make about $500 in a year. Barber was prepared to spend the equivalent of 1,000 workers' yearly wages on a single integrated estate. He could afford it. Diamond Match still printed profits. Barberton still grew. And Barber saw what this place could mean, not only to himself and to Anna, but to the town below. Anadine Farm would stand as a working symbol of success, a proof of what industry could build and what a local future might look like. It would host gatherings, welcome visitors, employ neighbors, and buy from local suppliers. It would be private home and public inspiration at once. That promise felt tangible in the first construction seasons. Stone was quarried and set. The power plant rose, foundations for the main house locked into the hillside. The site filled daily with masons, carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. The slope throbbed with ordered work. Barber walked the grounds often, checking details and adjusting course. Legacy was turning into walls, pipes, and light. Anna Dean Farm aimed to demonstrate care for land, for town, for tomorrow. It set out to prove that a match manufacturer from Ohio could create something as poised as a European country seat and as modern as any American innovation, enduring to the extent that stone, steel, and discipline could make endurance real. But the shift had begun already. Dream to mega project, vision to load. Monthly expenses climbed before the last rafters were set. Scope continued to creep. What started as a country house with a working farm had become larger, more intricate, and far more expensive than anyone first imagined. In those bright building years, though, with the plant humming, the house climbing, and the horizon still wide, the hidden price stayed out of frame. The bills would arrive later. They always do. The bills would arrive later. First came the systems. Anna Dean Farm was not merely built, it was engineered. Every grand room, every carved banister, every marble fireplace depended on an unseen grid threaded under floors and inside walls. Water, heat, electricity, drainage, communication. Without that hidden machinery, the house could not function, and installing it demanded a level of technical discipline that most private homes never attempted. Start with the power plant. It stood in its own structure, apart from the main house yet tied to it by underground conduits. Inside, coal-fired boilers, steam turbines, electrical generators. The plant produced enough current to light the mansion and the greenhouses, stables, workshops, and staff quarters scattered across the grounds. It ran continuously. Coal arrived by the ton on short rail spurs. Firemen fed furnaces, watched gauges, and serviced valves. The work followed a clock. Boilers up before dawn so hot water and heat were ready when the household stirred. Output raised through the busy hours, eased a little at night, but never fully stopped. The electrical web was a capital project on its own. Wiring had to be threaded through stone and plaster. Fixtures set in room after room. Switches, outlets, fuse boxes, redundancies. While many American houses still relied on gas or candles, Anna Dean Farm glowed with electric light, chandeliers, sconces, reading lamps, even exterior floods that washed the terraces after dark. Spectacular, modern, and costly to keep in working order. Water posed its own problems. A tall tower held thousands of gallons drawn from wells and reservoirs, pressurized to feed the entire property. Hot water meant additional loops. Boilers in the plant heated it and sent it through insulated lines to baths, kitchens, and laundries. Cold water had to reach stables and glass houses. Drainage needed to carry waste safely down the slope without touching the supply. The engineering was intricate. Getting it right required expertise, strong materials, and constant oversight. Heating was perhaps the boldest system. Steam promised steady, controllable warmth, so long as the network held. Underground mains carried steam from the plant to radiators in the big house and in outbuildings. Lines had to be correctly insulated, correctly pitched, correctly maintained. Leaks bled fuel. Frozen runs killed heat. Repairs meant cutting trenches, swapping pipe, tamping back the earth. Ohio winters punish mistakes. Heat here was not optional. Period maps read like a municipal diagram. The main house anchored the plan, radiating outward. Power plant to the south, Glass houses to the east, stables to the west, farm buildings positioned with intention. Lines on paper traced electric conduits, steam routes, water mains, and drains. Everything linked, everything interdependent. Running the grid demanded people. Not only cooks and housekeepers, but engineers, electricians, plumbers, and furnace crews. The day began early. At 5 in the morning, the firemen had the boilers bright. Water systems were tested, switchboards checked, vents opened, and glass houses watered. Stables mucked and animals fed. House staff moved to breakfast, rooms, deliveries. By mid-morning, the estate behaved like a small city, humming on schedule. In peak season, when the barbers were in residence and entertaining, 30 or more employees might be working at once: cooks, servers, footmen, maids, groundskeepers, stable hands, maintenance crews. Each job had a list, a timetable, a standard. Over them stood a chief engineer, a head groundsman, a house manager, hierarchy, coordination, payroll. Then the numbers began to stack: coal purchases, wages, repairs, replacement parts, insurance, taxes, monthly operating costs that would stagger anyone used to an ordinary household. Anna Dean Farm was not only expensive to build, it was expensive to keep breathing. Every day demanded fuel, labor, attention, and cash. Yet when the lattice held, when steam whispered through risers, when chandeliers burned clean, when hot water spilled from marble taps, the effect was astonishing. The place felt animate, warm, welcoming, modern in a way few addresses could rival. It felt simply like the future. No one pressed the simpler question: how long could the future afford to run? Boilers asked for coal. Pipes asked for care. Staff asked for pay. The same systems that made Anna Dean Farm possible made it insatiable. And they never stopped. And they never stopped running. Yet not all rooms were created equal. Walk through Anna Dean Farm at its height, and you would move between two distinct worlds, often divided only by a doorway or a flight of stairs. The public rooms, the domains for guests, entertaining, display, embodied everything the Gilded Age promised: high ceilings, ornate plaster, marble fireplaces cut and shipped from Italy, hardwood floors burnished to a mirror, windows so tall they framed the valley like living paintings. Here orchestras played, here evening dress met champagne. Here business visitors grasped, without a word, that O.C. Barber had arrived. The music room centered on a grand piano, reportedly a Steinway, though the records differ, set to catch the room's best acoustics. The library gathered leather-bound volumes around deep chairs arranged for reading or quiet talk. The dining room seated more than 20 beneath a chandelier so large it needed a stepladder for care. Yes, there was a ballroom, room enough for dancing and for the kind of gatherings that turn a house into a destination. Turn a corner, take the service stairs, slip through a discreet door, and the air changed. The basement hummed. Literally, you could hear the building working, water rushing in pipes, steam hissing, the electrical thrum of generators feeding power upward. Down here lived the machinery that made elegance possible. Boiler rooms, mechanical bays, storage stacked with coal, supplies, and standby equipment, brick walls, not marble, concrete floors, not parquet, at every turn, function before beauty. The laundry occupied a substantial suite, industrial sinks, drying racks, pressing gear. Clothing for a household this size meant full-time labor, specialized tools, and counsel, and endless hot water. The kitchen sprawled through several rooms, prep counters, cook lines, cool rooms, pantries, commercial equipment everywhere, ranges big enough to roast entire sides of beef, ovens turning out dozens of loaves at once, ice boxes fed by the estate's own ice house. An elevator tied the levels together, but not for guests. A service car, strictly utilitarian, it moved supplies, linens, firewood, anything too heavy or awkward for the stairs. The shaft hid in the walls, unseen by visitors, essential to operations. Staff rode it constantly, ferrying what the visible house required without breaking the illusion. The contrast was intentional, architecture as policy. Public rooms existed to impress, to comfort, to stage taste and wealth. Working rooms existed to sustain that impression, to stay out of sight, to function with precision. Above, art, music, light pouring through high windows. Below, leather belts driving machines, steam valves that wanted constant adjustment, coal bins that needed refilling every day. The greenhouse complex made this duality obvious. Enter through the public door, and you stepped into a tropical pocket. Exotics from far climates, planned paths, humid warmth in the heart of winter, orchids, palms, vines reaching toward glass. The air smelled of earth and bloom, a showpiece and a conversation starter, proof that Barber could make summer on command. Behind the scenes, the illusion demanded labor, propagation benches, potting rooms, tool racks, heating loops. Everyday staff watered, pruned, checked thermometers, treated disease, and replaced failures. The beauty people saw was continuously renewed, managed, measured, and expensive. The stables told the same story. Public areas gleamed, polished brass, carved timber, stalls finished with the finest materials. Visitors admired bloodlines, discussed breeding, praised the standard of care. Behind the neat aisles lived the realities: feed storage, manure handling, veterinary bays, tack, and harness rooms. Glamour required infrastructure. Infrastructure required money and hands. This divided architecture defined Anna Dean Farm. Every public moment of grace rested on private moments of work. Each chandelier needed someone to change bulbs, clean prisms, check wiring. Each marble floor demanded scrubbing. Each radiator wanted watching. Each system required maintenance. Outward, the house presented one face, elegant, effortless, eternal. Turn it around, and another face appeared. A machine, complex, demanding, hungry for inputs, beautiful at certain angles, brutally practical at others. Both were true, both were necessary, and both consumed money that never stopped moving. Down through floors, out through doors, into wages, coal, repairs, taxes. The systems did not care which rooms they served, they simply ran, and the bills kept coming. And the bills kept arriving? But Barber believed the farm could help meet them. This was not a gentleman's showplace with decorative herds idling on postcard pastures. Anna Dean Farm was built to produce, scientifically managed, rigorously documented, meant to earn alongside its beauty. Barber approached agriculture the way he approached matches, with systems, data, and the conviction that efficiency turns inputs into profit. The animals were not merely stock, they were assets, entries in a ledger that ought, on paper, to balance. The piggery made that philosophy plain. Set downhill from the big house, far enough to spare complaints, close enough for oversight, it kept dozens of pigs in conditions that, for the early 20th century, were notably humane and modern. Buildings breathed well, floors were kept clean, layouts reduced disease. No crowding, room to move, outdoor runs when weather allowed, secure shelter when it did not. Comfort served a purpose beyond kindness. Healthy pigs put on weight faster, yielded better meat, commanded better prices. Staff logged feed with precision. What each cohort ate, how much, how often. Weight charts tracked gains. Any sign of illness meant immediate isolation, treatment, monitoring. Pork supplied the estate and, when surplus allowed, the local market. The goal was clear: maximize yield, minimize loss, convert grain and labor into revenue. The numbers were kept with care. Weekly feed costs, per animal weight gain, carcass yield, market quotes. Surviving records, fragmentary yet telling, show a serious operation. This was not agriculture as theater. It was agriculture as business. Poultry followed the same logic. Chickens and ducks lived in purpose-built houses with dedicated water and timed feeding. The duck ponds were infrastructure, not scenery. Fresh water flowing in, waste flowing out, systems staying clean. Staff gathered eggs daily, tallied totals, tracked which birds laid steadily and which lagged. Poor performers were culled. Reliable layers kept for breeding. Hundreds of eggs left the nests each week. Some went straight to the mansion's kitchen. Others went to Barberton shops and restaurants. The income was modest yet tangible. Every dozen recouped a few cents, shaving a sliver from the constant outflow that kept the estate alive. The stables held the most valuable animals: horses for saddle, for carriage, for the show ring. Barber bought quality bloodlines, stock that could win ribbons and draw stud fees, daily grooming, regular exercise, premium hay and grain, immediate veterinary attention. Nothing was left to chance, but first-rate care carried first-rate costs: farrier visits, specialty feed, training time, show entries. Skilled stable hands paid to do things right. The horses dazzled visitors and fueled conversation. They also consumed cash. Breeding fees and occasional sales brought money in, but rarely enough to meet what went out. Cattle grazed the pastures and paid in dairy and beef. The dairy supplied milk, cream, and butter to the house. Surplus went to buyers in town. Beef cattle were finished for meat, slaughtered on site, or sold through market channels. Again, everything went into books, feed, veterinary bills, yields, sale proceeds. Over time, those figures formed a clear picture of what it actually cost to farm at this standard. The ledgers, line by careful line, revealed the gap. Yes, the farm produced eggs, pork, milk, beef, stud fees, but it did not produce enough, not nearly. In a good year, agricultural income might cover a fraction of monthly operating costs, perhaps 1/10 or at best 1/5. The remainder still depended on Barber's industrial fortune, so the farm stood humane, well-run, impressively organized, proof of what modern methods can do with capital and skill. It never became the thing Barber wanted most, a self-supporting enterprise that justified itself in profit. The animals thrived. The systems worked. The books were precise. But arithmetic does not bend to intent. The farm was a cost center dressed in a business plan, handsome, functional, and ultimately reliant on money flowing from elsewhere. The ledgers told the truth, without drama and without mercy. This could not pay for itself. This couldn't pay for itself, but for one night, maybe for a few. Yet let's imagine one perfect evening, none of that mattered. Picture it. Summer. Likely 1910 or 1911, Anadine Farm at its absolute height. Every system in tune. Every light alive. Grounds cut to a razor's edge. The main house filled with guests, business associates from Cleveland and Akron, civic leaders from Barberton. Friends and family gathered to honor success. Music drifting from open windows, laughter, crystal chiming, a night that persuades you the cost is justified, the approach alone impressed. Carriages rolled the long drive, and later, early automobiles Barber had begun to favor. Gates stood open in welcome. Trees arched a canopy over the lane. Then the house lifted from the hillside, lit within and from below, every window aglow in a near-theatrical reveal. This was more than a dwelling, it was a declaration. You have arrived. This is what success looks like. Inside, the working organism became a showplace. Service zones stayed invisible. Machinery murmured in the basement. Staff moved like air. Glasses topped, plates cleared. Perfection maintained without notice. Upstairs, the public rooms shone. In the music room, a small orchestra, violins, perhaps a cello, with piano grounding the ensemble, played popular tunes and waltzes, refined enough to signal taste, inviting enough to draw guests onto the floor. The dining room turned the estate's productivity into spectacle. Fresh vegetables from the greenhouses, arranged with care. Pork from the piggery, shaped by cooks who could lift farm to table into fine dining. Milk, cream, and butter from the dairy. There was wine and imported delicacy, yes, but also proof that Anna Dean Farm could feed itself magnificently. The meal was not only sustenance, it was a demonstration. The ballroom, if we name it so, assuming the space was as grand as some recall, filled with dancers. Floors had been polished for days. The chandelier seized light and scattered it across faces and gilt. Young and old moved through formal sets that demanded timing and practice. Music swelled. Onlookers approved. Culture here and now in industrial Ohio. Outside, the grounds extended the spell. Lanterns traced paths through deep garden shade. The reflecting pool caught the moon and the mansion's glow, doubling both. Fountains stitched sound into the scene, water catching light mid-arc. A guest could step out for air, trade a few quiet words, and feel impossibly far from the mills and yards that made all this possible. The greenhouses themselves glowed. Even at night, silhouettes of palms pressed against glass, a shard of perpetual summer in the middle of Ohio. Some guests surely walked down to feel the humid warmth, breathe earth and blossom, witness winter held at bay by design and money. Below, the power plant kept its rhythm. Near the stables, lamps burned where crews minded the works, turbines spun, boilers held pressure, steam moved through buried mains, keeping rooms warm and taps hot, offering comfort to guests who never needed to wonder where comfort came from. Dozens worked that night, musicians, servers, cooks, cleaners, engineers, drivers, each adding a thread to a single evening's weave. Barbara and Anna moved through the crowd, receiving praise, embodying the part they had written for themselves, benefactors, visionaries, evidence that industry can purchase beauty. This house, this night, this moment, here was vindication. The risk, the outlay, the reach. Look at what we made. Look at what we achieved. Look. For that one night, perhaps it was enough. Perhaps the bills fell silent. Perhaps arithmetic could be ignored. Perhaps beauty and shared celebration were payment in themselves. The music carried on. The lights blazed. The house breathed, hummed, shone. This was the peak. The instant Anna Dean Farm became what Barbara imagined. Untouchable, immortal, perfect. Peaks, however, obey gravity. What rises must eventually fall. And the descent, once it began, came slower than anyone guessed. Quieter, harder to notice, but no less certain. No less inevitable, and the cracks began long before anyone admitted they existed. Not literal fissures, those would arrive later, with plaster splitting in unused rooms and roofs starting to leak. The early damage was subtler, financial, systemic, the kind of erosion that happens one bill at a time, one repair at a time, 1 year of expenses outpacing revenue at a time. You do not see it at first. You see it when you realize the pattern has been building for months, perhaps years, and reversing it would require the one thing you do not have: less house. Fuel costs led the way. Coal prices rose and fell with markets Barbara could not steer. 1 year a ton cost a certain sum. The next, it might be dearer by a fifth. The power plant did not care. It burned what was needed to keep lights on, water hot, and heat steady. In a typical winter, the estate consumed hundreds of tons. A mild season shaved the bill. A harsh one drove it higher. Weather ignored accounting. Precise budgeting was impossible. Maintenance crept upward. The roof began to leak. Not a catastrophe, just slate aging under wind and weather. Repairing a roof like this was no weekend patch. It meant scaffolding, skilled crews, special order materials from suppliers who priced for a client of means. One section fixed this year, another 2 years later. The invoices piled up, thousands of dollars simply to keep rain out. Insurance followed the same slope. A property this valuable and complex looked like concentrated risk to underwriters. Fire could erase millions in assets. Storms, theft, liability. If a guest fell on stairs, each possibility got priced. Premiums climbed annually. Not insuring was unthinkable. Paying meant diverting money from other repairs and investments. Equipment aged in place. Turbines at the plant needed parts, then replacements. Boilers required inspections, overhauls, periodic rebuilding. Pipes corroded. Electrical runs developed faults. Pumps failed. Nothing was built to last forever. And running the estate hard, day after day, year after year, meant breakage. Some months brought routine gaskets and valves. Other weeks brought an entire pump assembly in the small hours when something let go. Payroll would not yield without service collapsing. You could not dismiss the engineer who kept the plant alive. You could not lose the grounds crew and expect the gardens to prune themselves. You could not cut the kitchen and still host. The payroll was essentially fixed, a heavy monthly obligation that did not go away. Beyond the iron gates, the world was changing in ways that tightened the vice. Property taxes in Ohio rose. Local governments needed revenue, schools needed funding, roads demanded upkeep. With thousands of acres and dozens of buildings, Anadine Farm presented a broad tax base. Assessors set values and sent notices. Barber paid, and each year the figure grew. Markets softened exactly where the estate hoped for relief. Prices for eggs, pork, and breeding fees flattened or slipped while costs marched upward. The gap widened, not in a single dramatic break, but steadily, relentlessly. The books recorded the story, more out than in, month after month, year after year. Barber's industrial fortune could bridge the difference. Diamond Match still produced strong profits, but other holdings called for cash. Other projects needed capital. Barberton itself required ongoing support: the hospital, the schools, the infrastructure that made the town work. Barber's wealth was large, not limitless. Increasingly, Anadine Farm was a drain rather than an asset. The house to the eye seemed untouched by pressure. Lights still blazed. Heat still washed the corridors. Staff still kept the ritual. Guests saw the same elegance, the same comfort, the same suggestion of bottomless means. But in ledgers and account books, in quiet conversations between Barber and his financial advisors, a question formed: how long can this continue? No one wanted to answer. Not yet. The house was too beautiful. The dream felt too important. Surely something would turn. Costs would settle. Income would rise. The balance would correct itself. It would not. The arithmetic was plain. Yet hope is powerful. Inertia is real. And no one wants to be the voice that finally says the impossible thing aloud. Nobody wants to speak the impossible truth, especially when you're still doing good. And Barber was still doing good. Real, tangible, consequential good. The kind that builds institutions and outlives any mansion. While Anadine Farm consumed money at an unsustainable rate, Barber's generosity toward Barberton did not falter. The town he founded continued to benefit from his vision, his capital, his refusal to let it become just another industrial dot on the Ohio map. The hospital stands out. In 1913, Barber gave land and major funding for what became Barberton Citizens Hospital. Not a token clinic, not a bare-bones ward, a modern hospital with trained staff, surgical capacity, and contemporary equipment. For a working town, this was transformative. Injured mill hands had somewhere to go. Women could deliver safely. Illness met proper treatment. Lives were saved, literally and measurably. The gift cost Barber tens of thousands of dollars, perhaps more. Sources differ, but the commitment was unambiguous. And unlike Anadine Farm, which primarily served his family and guests, the hospital served everyone. Factory workers, shopkeepers, children, anyone who needed care. Here wealth did what wealth should do: create public benefit, answer real need, build something that would matter long after the builder was gone. He funded schools, supported churches, paid into infrastructure, roads, sewers, civic buildings. With each contribution, Barberton grew sturdier. People had reason to be grateful. Barber was not only an employer, he was a patron and an advocate, the man who gave them not just jobs, but a community with the tools to thrive. The pride must have been immense. This was legacy with weight. Anadine Farm impressed. Barberton Citizens Hospital healed. Schools educated. Infrastructure made daily life work for thousands. If forced to choose between private luxury and public good, the record suggests Barber valued both, yet knew which truly counted. And here lay the painful irony. The more he gave to Barberton, the harder it became to sustain Anadine Farm. Every dollar to the hospital was a dollar not fixing slate and flashing. Every gift to schools was money not buying coal for the plant. The donations were necessary, admirable, right. Yet they drew from the same finite fortune meant to sustain both civic generosity and private splendor. The ledgers of those years are blunt. Agricultural income, modest and trending down. Rents from Barberton properties, steady yet insufficient. Dividends from industry, strong but increasingly earmarked for public needs. Operating costs at Anadine Farm, rising annually. The shortfall between what the estate earned and what it cost to run, measured in tens of thousands of dollars each year, covered from Barber's other assets, the same pool funding hospitals and schools. The math was cruel. Keeping Anadine Farm fully operational cost more each year than many significant public projects. Monthly utilities alone could pay a teacher's annual salary. Staff payroll exceeded the budgets of some civic departments. Property taxes on the estate could have paved streets, upgraded water lines, checked off 100 practical tasks. Barber was not naive. He saw the imbalance. But abandoning Anadine Farm, or even throttling it back, meant admitting the dream could not defeat arithmetic. It meant conceding that the house bearing his wife's name, built to last forever, had a horizon. So he pressed on, paying both sets of bills, funding the hospital while heating the mansion, supporting schools while keeping the greenhouses alive, giving to the town while sustaining Anadine Farm, trying to do everything, knowing he could not do everything, hoping for a turn that would make it possible. The gifts kept flowing into Barberton. Checks kept covering the estate, and the gap kept widening. Barber's generosity was real. His contributions mattered. The hospital saved lives. Schools formed generations. The town prospered because he cared enough to invest. But every gift made saving the house harder. And the house increasingly needed saving. And the house, more and more, needed saving. From things that should not have mattered and yet did. Not fires, not floods, not headline disasters you can blame on fate. The cuts came from the ordinary, legal, administrative, procedural. Problems that arrive in envelopes, pile on desks, demand signatures and checks, each nick small, together, fatal. Taxes struck first with bureaucratic regularity. Assessments landed every year, and every year they seemed to climb by invention. Ohio valued property on paper worth, and on paper, Anadine Farm was immense. Thousands of acres, dozens of structures, systems, and plant worth small fortunes. Assessors walked the grounds, took notes, reached for comparables that did not exist, and set figures that made sense to their tables, but crushed the man who had to pay them. The invoices followed, thousands of dollars, non-negotiable, pay or accept liens, court, seizure. Barber paid. But each tax check was money not glazing greenhouse panes, not replacing boiler tubes, not covering overtime in busy seasons. A fixed cost that punished beauty, penalized ambition, and treated value as theoretical while demanding cash in full. Insurance climbed the same slope. Not because disaster struck, but because the algorithms said it could. Actuaries recalculated replacement costs and liability, decided exposure had deepened, and raised premiums accordingly. Another heavy annual sum, due regardless of revenue, weather, or circumstance. Legal complications multiplied in quiet rooms. An estate this large touched multiple jurisdictions, boundary lines, easements, water rights, zoning shifts as Barberton grew. Each file needed counsel needed payment. Some disputes closed for a few $100s, others for a few thousand. A few lingered for years, bleeding slowly all the while. Weather added its own paper trail. Rain found weak points, a slate seam here, flashing there. Not cataclysm, but seepage that stained ceilings, softened beams, freckled plaster, attics, pooled water in corners. Structure for now stood. Surfaces suffered. Guests noticed. Staff logged it. Repairs went to triage. Public rooms first, hidden spaces later. Delay spread damage. Spread meant larger bills. Compliance became a profession. Permits for alterations, inspections, new codes for electric, plumbing, drainage, fees, applications, approvals, specialists hired simply to navigate forms. What once was simple, Barber decided, and crews built, now moved through layers of process. Time slowed. Costs grew. Then came the petty abrasions, late invoices for months-old work, vendors inching up prices, suppliers tightening credit. Not from insolvency, but because volume meant some payments lagged. Late fees, interest, penalties for missed stamps and dates, each small, each cumulative. Staff saw the signals no guest should. Furniture discreetly tagged for possible sale, not for lack of beauty, but for liquidity. Marble pieces crated to storage, silver inventoried, paintings appraised. Nothing moved yet, not officially. The preparation alone spoke. If cash is needed quickly, these can go. Outwardly, the machine still ran, lights bright, heat steady, lawns exact. But the folders told another story. Ledgers washed in red, files thick with tax notices, insurance schedules, legal correspondence, repair estimates. Administration had grown as heavy as maintenance. Barber was wealthy. Wealth is not infinite. The house behaved as though it required infinity. The paper cuts kept coming. Small wounds, constant bleeding, a death by 1,000 necessities. And there was no bandage broad enough to bind it. And there was no bandage broad enough to stop it. So eventually, the house began to empty. Not in a single gesture, not with headlines or a formal farewell. Quietly, gradually. The way endings arrive when everyone understands but no one will say it aloud. Staff numbers thinned first. Vacancies from retirements or resignations went unfilled. The grounds crew that once counted a dozen hands slipped to 6, then 4. House staff combined roles. One person doing the work of 2, then the work of 3. Systems still needed tending, but corners could be trimmed. Rooms were shut, radiators turned off to save heat. Sections of lawn were kept to a minimum. Guest wings stayed dark. Ohio Columbus Barber died in 1920. He was 79. He had lived to see his match empire flourish, his town prosper, his hospital open, and his dream house burn through resources faster than any ledger could justify. Anna Dean Farm passed to his heirs, Anna herself, then his children, along with the decisions he had deferred. What do you do with a mansion that devours a fortune to maintain, yet cannot sell for anything near its cost? What do you do with beauty once it becomes a burden? Anna Dean Barber tried to keep the lights on. The house bore her name, the tribute and legacy her husband intended. But she faced the same arithmetic, now without his industrial engine actively minting new wealth. The estate had to live on what it produced and what remained of family capital. The gulf between those two figures was vast. The 1920s were hard on great houses everywhere. The economy wavered. Labor grew costlier. Taste shifted. Fewer people aspired to mimic European aristocracy. More questioned the morality of private excess. Anna Dean Farm felt out of step, not villainous, anachronistic. A Gilded Age relic carried into a decade with different priorities. Tag sales began in the mid-1920s. They were called estate sales, carefully avoiding words like liquidation. Items went: furniture, art, decorative pieces, beautiful, well-made things converted into cash to buy a few months of taxes, or insurance, or urgent repair. Buyers came from Akron and Cleveland, dealers who knew value, collectors scenting opportunity. Marble mantels were crated, chandeliers lowered from their hooks. The music room's piano, Steinway, if the stories are right, found another home. Silence spread. Emptiness gathered. Rooms that once glowed now echoed. The ballroom stood still more often than not. The dining table that had seated 20 hosted family dinners at one end. The greenhouses still kept their warmth, but with fewer varieties, fewer exotics. The stables boarded fewer horses. Farm operations shrank to a near household scale, enough to feed residents, not enough to produce meaningful revenue. The true dismantling began in the late 1920s and quickened into the 1930s. Structures that could not be kept were taken down. Not the main house, not yet, but the satellites. A greenhouse removed when failing glass grew too costly to replace. A barn demolished when the roof's rot outpaced its utility. The power plant likely throttled back or shut entirely, the estate tying into municipal current instead. Each choice was practical. Each choice reduced what Anna Dean Farm had been. The Depression made everything worse. Money that might have appeared simply vanished. Buyers for fine things evaporated. Property values fell through the floor. Taxes stayed high, while the ability to pay them evaporated. The buildings that remained needed constant care they did not receive. Water found paths. Plaster let go. Systems failed. Slow decay became visible. Decay became structural worry, became hazard. By the late 1930s, the estate, as an operating whole, was finished. The main house still stood, magnificent, empty, impossible. Parts of it may have stayed in use. Most rooms were closed, unheated, gathering dust. Where grounds were not actively managed, they went to seed. A dream that took years and millions to raise dissolved into something smaller and sadder. Abandoned real estate without a purpose and without an obvious buyer. The last dance had ended. The music was over. The guests were gone. What remained was stone and memory, and the unanswered question that lingered from the first ledger to the last: what becomes of beauty that cannot pay its own way? What remained was stone, memory, and a question no one had answered. Yet time, eventually, supplies its own answers. The main house came down in pieces, not as a single spectacle with dynamite and crowds, but by a drawn-out process that took years. In the 1940s, unsafe sections went first, collapsing roofs, loosening walls, floors no longer trustworthy. In the 1950s, more followed because maintaining fragments proved impossible, and buyers for a partial mansion were rarer than buyers for salvaged materials. Stone by stone, brick by brick, Anna Dean Farm was dismantled. Marble mantels were saved and sold. Woodwork was lifted and repurposed. Fixtures went to auction. A house that had cost hundreds of thousands to raise dwindled to scrap value and recollection. By the 1960s, the residence itself was gone. Its footprint lingered. You could walk the site and read where walls once stood, where rooms opened to terraces, where the grand entrance caught arriving guests. But the structure had returned to the earth as rubble and foundation stones slowly swallowed by grass. Not everything disappeared. The gates still stand. Those massive iron gates that frame nothing now frame everything. A threshold into memory. A portal announcing that you are stepping into a place where something consequential once existed. They have been maintained and protected. They matter for their beauty, yes, and also as markers. They say, this was important. This was real. People built something here that left a trace. The power plant outlived the mansion. Its stone walls were stout, its purpose legible, its shell fundamentally sound. For years, it stood empty, a monument to the infrastructure that once made elegance possible, then found new life through conversion and reuse. Accounts differ on the timing, but the building endured because it was built to last and because someone saw value in keeping it. Some of the stables remain. The barns that sheltered Barber's prized horses were too well made to discard. Subsequent owners adapted and maintained them. Good buildings do not have to die just because their first job ends. Walk by today, and it is easy to imagine the horses, the staff, the daily cadence of feeding and grooming. The land survived in altered form. Over decades, it was parceled and repurposed. Some tracts became housing, some stayed agricultural, some were sold or donated to stewards who could care for them. The 1,000 acres fractured into smaller holdings, each with its own chapter, all still tethered to the original vision by geography and memory, even when the architecture vanished. What we keep in the end is not decided by size, cost, or grand intent. It is decided by simpler tests: structural soundness, ongoing utility, and community affection. The survivors were the pieces that could be repurposed, that met present needs, that people chose to maintain. The losses were too specialized, too costly, too bound to a lifestyle no longer sustainable. The lessons are uncomfortable and clear. Preservation wants more than good intentions. It wants income. A mansion without revenue is memory with bills, and bills win. Status helps. Legal protection as a historic site can slow the wrecking ball. Endowments and trusts can pay what individuals cannot. Above all, preservation needs community love, active use, not distant admiration, school tours, local events, everyday functions that keep buildings relevant to living generations, not only as monuments to the dead. Barberton's relationship with Anadine Farm changed with time. What began as a symbol of one man's wealth became shared history, a reminder of the town's Gilded Age origins. The hospital Barber funded served residents long after his house was gone. Schools educated generations. Infrastructure he financed underwrote growth. The public gifts outlasted the private palace by decades. Today, visitors can walk where the estate once stood. The gates frame imagination. The remaining buildings offer a tangible hold on the past. Historical markers tell the abbreviated version. The full truth asks you to look beyond what is visible, into ledgers and letters, into choices made and postponed, into the arithmetic that outlasted beauty. The house is gone. The dream concluded. The memory remains, carried by those willing to keep it. Dawn would break through the rafters of an empty roof, if the roof still existed. Instead, light falls on grass, on stone, on gates that open onto absence. A house without income is memory with bills, but hearts return in small steps. The gates still stand. That is something. That is enough to begin again.